Future Fest legends, we hope you had an incredible 10 minutes resetting and refreshing for our next module or section of the day. I'm going to do a little bit of talking with you now, and then I'm going to be really excited to introduce our two panelists who are going to be talking about building a better business, all the things around designing a better business and the thinking that goes behind the prototyping and the testing right from the beginning to create the business that you really want to see in the world. But before we dig into that, I want to tap back to some of the incredible ideation we did in our first session. Now, you finished up our first session with this wicked list of problems that you whittled down to one. And then from there, you developed this divergent list of products and services, and that's kind of where we finished up. Now what we want to do is kind of pick apart the products and services that we've got to pick the ones that might be most aligned to the wicked problem that we've chosen. And I want to show you two examples of how to marry your product or your service, if that's where you want to go down, tightly with the business that you're trying to create. And these two brands won't be unfamiliar to them. They're fantastic examples of social enterprises, and many of you probably have them in your home or you've seen them in the shops. The first brand that I want to talk to you about is Thank You, made famous first by Thank You Water, and then moved into other things like food, muesli, baby products, and a whole bunch of other stuff. They put 100% of their profits back into the causes that they support, and I want to focus in on the water to begin with. Now, Thank You sell bottled water to fund getting clean drinking water to people in the developing world who don't have access to that. So there's a really tight connection between selling water to get clean water to people who need it most. Now, they're not selling muesli bars to fund water. The products that they sell that are food related are then related to supporting different causes. So they maintain that really tight alignment between the product that they're selling and the problem that they're solving. So that's one example of that alignment. I want to show you another one. Another really famous example, it's in my house. I'm sure it might be in your house too, or you may have seen it at venues and places that you've gone to, and it's Who Gives a Crap toilet paper. Now, these guys sell toilet paper to fund toilets in places that don't have access to clean sanitation. Again, a really tight link between the product that they're selling and the problem that they're solving. So what I want you to think about now, look at your wicked problem that you've got, and then look at your list of products and services. Which products and services in that list fits most neatly or tightly with the wicked problem that you want to solve? So thinking about the example, we've got selling water to get clean drinking water. We've got selling toilet paper to get toilets. Another example would be Lauren Shuttleworth, who sells notebooks, and that goes to fund education days for girls in the developing world. Again, a really tight link between stationery and what you need for school, and then funding education days. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes now, 3 minutes in fact, to pick the product or service from your list that aligns most tightly to the problem that you're solving. We'll see you back in 3 minutes. Welcome back, guys. So in that 3 minutes, hopefully what you've done as a team or perhaps as a class, you've looked at your list of products and services and you've gone, which products and which services kind of align with or connect to or in the same industry or space as the problem that we're trying to solve. And so at this point in time, you'll have your wicked problem that you're trying to solve, and you'll have maybe a couple of products or services, ideally maybe one that you're pretty excited about, that you think could be a fun idea to build around your problem. Now, to give you a little bit more context, information, and to lean on some experience, we've got two incredible humans that I'm going to introduce you to in order to tell you a little bit about what they do and perhaps impart a little bit of their experience and knowledge to you in order to help you with your design process as you come up with your own innovative solution that makes the world a better place. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome Lou from No Talk Surfboards and also Leon from Future Thingy to Future Fest today. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Thanks.
Amazing. Now, rather than me read these really long-winded bios, which I can do, maybe it might be best if you guys just introduce a little bit about yourself and maybe about about your business and like what it does as a bit of a starting point. Lou, do you want to kick off?
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. So I have a business called No Tox Surfboards Australia, and I started that 3 years ago because I was looking for surfboards that were not the norm. So I couldn't find what I was looking for. And then eventually I did find something in Europe. So I sold my car, I flew to Europe, and I bought 6 surfboards, which was all I could afford. And so these boards were made out of cork and flax fibre. They weren't made out of the foam and plastic. And 3 years later, here we are. And we're selling them in Australia and making them in Australia.
And they look pretty slick too,
Yeah.
can I just say? Yeah. I was saying to Lou off air that I have 2 surfboards at home, one of which I got for my 21st birthday, and I literally can't remember the last time I got up on it. So perhaps today is a bit of a prompt for me to get up on a board again. I'd love to dig in a little bit more about like what couldn't you find in Australia specifically that you became a little bit frustrated with? What was the problem that you identified, I guess?
Yeah. So a lot of surfboards are made from fiberglass or plastic. So when you're looking for the foam surfboards, they're made of plastic, they deteriorate quite easily. So like, you know, the kids are dragging along the bitumen and the footpath on the beach before they get to the water, so the plastic's falling off. And then this whole microplastic problem was really, was quite heightened a few years ago, you know, where you'd see a kid riding his boogie board, his foam boogie board in the beach, and then on the shoreline you could see the little bits of foam coming off his board. So I was looking for something that didn't do that. And that's when I found the cork surfboards. And so there's surf schools and disability surfers in Europe using these surfboards because they're waterproof, they're they're not watertight, but they're waterproof. So if it does get a ding in it or a hole in it, it doesn't suck water in. And then we sort of move on to the more advanced version of surfboards, which is what we have here. And we're trying to get professional surfers, you know, people who are throwing their surfboards away, you know, they'll only get 6 months, a year or something out of a board, and then they throw it away. Where does it go? Where's the graveyard for surfboards? We don't know. It's just in the landfill. Well, there is someone who has come up with a solution for that, but that's a whole other conversation. That's Nev House, so you can look up Nev House. He's taking surfboard rubbish now, so that's pretty cool. And he's building houses out of it. But yeah, so then we're trying to get professional surfers or competent surfers onto these more durable, lightweight, you know, people think because they're brown or they're made out of plant-based materials that they are heavy, but they are not because we put them in vacuum bags, and so they're more durable. So just trying to get rid of that, you know, that surfboards are a throwaway item. You know, they don't have to be. So that's what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. Just for those playing at home that might not know, what are microplastics?
So microplastic is just plastic that just keeps breaking down, you know, so when it's like rubbing on through the water or the sand, or, you know, it just keeps getting abrased and getting broken down smaller and smaller and smaller. The fish eat it, then we eat the fish, and we're ingesting the plastic.
Awesome, thanks for clarifying. Leon, I'd love to know a little bit about, and I've already expressed to you that I think you might have my most favourite business name in the entire world. So tell me a little bit about you and Future Thingy.
So my background is industrial design. So I studied that about 15 years ago, and industrial design is the design of pretty much everything physical that we experience in the world, short of architecture and fashion, and even that is impacted by industrial design. So when you wake up in the morning, and by the time you go to sleep, you've interacted with about 600 to 800 products, technology, door handles, shoes, cars, and that all is all encompassed by industrial design. So it's the design of mass-produced things. So I was interested in the environment when I was studying industrial design, when I started to work in consumer electronics. So I had a big challenge believing in the kind of things I was designing. So it's often things that would end up being produced in the hundreds of thousands of units. And as a designer and a cog amongst this massive industrial wheel, it was very difficult to have an impact on that. So since then, I've ended up doing a lot of consulting work on my own, so went independent and started a couple of different brands and businesses along the way. I started an industrial design school here in Brisbane with 3 other colleagues to teach design in different ways. Consulted for the automotive industry in the US as well. And then future thinking came about that a little bit later on as I started to realize I needed to sort of separate myself from that industrial design part in some degrees, keep the bits that I was really good at and interested in and thought were valuable, and move forward into the future. And the thinking part was essentially, well, there are so many things I'm interested in that I want to have an impact on that it was quite vague, and it's a thingamajig that I wanted to work on in design. So that is how that name came about.
Yeah, cool. I'd love to dig in to a part of your story in the sense that I think young people today that are in school often feel like that once they do a degree that they're locked into that traditional pathway of that career forever. And it sounds like, you know, from your story that you just shared then, like, yes, you moved into like a university degree, but then you've been able to tailor that trajectory post that learning to kind of align with your values and the things that you find interesting. What were the parts of industrial design that you wanted to keep doing? And then what were some of the parts of that degree or that work that you were like, you know what, this isn't my bag, and so I'm going to let that stuff go? And was that hard to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I completely agree. I think often you look at a 4-year program at a university and you come out of that 4 years and you're supposed to be that thing. Like, now I am this and this is all I can do. It took me a couple of years to get into industrial design. I came from a big creative family. I spent a year or 2 flailing around and tried things that weren't creative at all and realized I was drawing on everything. So I had to do something creative. So it took a little while to figure that out. And once I was doing it, I started to realize, okay, there is this environmental impact. There is this disassociation that I'm just a designer, all I really do is this bit. When it comes out into the world and ends up in a landfill, you're not really my responsibility. And there was this kind of disconnection from the reality there, and that was kind of my experience of it. But it does have this amazing positive impact where you can actually design things that theoretically makes life better for people. Ways of accessing technology or making things democratic and achievable for a lower cost and better quality. So I sort of looked at the foundations of industrial design being problem solving and analyzing things and looking at the world with a very curious and critical eye. What is this and how is this made, and could it be better? Is it the right thing? So analytical aspects and curiosity around, again, materials and is it working for the thing it was designed for? The creative elements in terms of drawing and prototyping and building things by hand and visualizing things at the end, and them being, you know, either be able to be produced tomorrow or they're amazing ideas for the 50 years in the future. So there's this kind of creative and strategic and hands-on elements that I believe are actually quite foundational to a lot of other industries, especially. So I find that to be the thing that I've held on to. But also the understanding of how things are produced and what it takes to get something out in the world. I'm glad I have that. And I've also been sort of towing the line between stepping away from that, but also, again, like I said, keeping those bits and pieces and understanding that that's at the moment the reality that we're living in. Yeah.
Amazing. I love the way that you brought in that creativity and curiosity that you had, because I think a lot of creative young people sometimes feel like those talents aren't worth exploring. Like we kind of dump on the creative industry sometimes and look at them as not being formative pathways post-school, and that you kind of need to, what's your real job going to be? And really, like, what I find is a lot of industries, the foundation of doing those industries really well is actually curiosity and creativity, and like harnessing those talents and actually capitalizing on them is so powerful. In thinking about some of the projects that you've worked on, what's maybe 1 or 2 of your favorites, and how have they gone from concept through to completion? And is it like a linear journey? Like, is it kind of, I have an idea and then I'm going to launch it and I'm going to make $1 million, and then for the rest of my life I'm going to surf on no-tox surfboards and live by the beach?
No.
Damn it.
No, but for me, no. But and it's not linear. You'll look at education, and quite often they go idea, prototype, solution, or problem, solution. And you can draw a straight line, and you can convince someone even to explain to a client, this is what we're going to do. The line's really a piece of spaghetti. It's like up and down, left and right, and back and forth, and you start again. And quite often you might end up halfway through that and go, this is actually not the right idea. I've built this now, or I've come up with this, and this is actually maybe, let's step back a bit. And having confidence in your process means you can step back and go, I want to go to this end goal, but I'm actually now winding back a bit, or I'm changing my mind and changing it. And I'm happy to do that because I still believe this is possible. Probably the most fun I've had in the recent years is working in the automotive industry with a consultancy in Chicago. And we've actually built like sort of full-scale vehicle interiors out of like cardboard and foam core and hot glue and magnets and things that the industry at the time, they spend months building things out of very rigid materials. Like they use clay quite a lot to model an interior and exterior vehicle to make sure it looks right. but they won't actually assess its functionality with those materials, because once you've finished making this very hard, rigid object, you can't go, oh, we should move those buttons down or change this around. So we approach it from let's just grab stuff literally out of a dumpster, cardboard boxes, foam tubes, and started to like hack together this space, interior space, which then we could kind of start coming up with solutions to the problems that we were finding in terms of the time it was things like touchscreens and visibility and control layouts. So there was this very hack way of getting to this the end result, which was renderings and ideas and concepts around how to improve that vehicle. So that's not necessarily influencing an exact thing you'll see on the road, but we're actually trying to come up with things that would make everything better, simpler and easier to use in this very lo-fi kind of fun way.
And I can add in on that with, how you start off with an idea and this is how to get there, but that might not work.
Yep.
So like originally we started off with wanting to make the cork surfboards for the surf schools, but we couldn't get the materials in Australia.
Yep.
I would have to bring shipping containers full of things from Germany to do this. So that's how this arrived, because I could get most of the materials here. Yeah.
And so that's really interesting, because I know in the way that No-Tox, the surfboards have been created, you've iterated with lots of different materials and you've learned.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through maybe what the materials were that you started? Because I imagine you would have had this ideal in your head, like we're going to use this material and it's going to be great and everyone's going to love it and it's going to do exactly what we want. And I imagine that maybe it didn't quite go to that plan. So what was the iteration or the prototyping process like, and how did you get feedback to work out what was working and what wasn't?
Well, the best way to get feedback is to just give people the end product and get them to test it and surf it and ride it and tell us how it feels. So there's a few problems that, so firstly, to address the question about the materials, where we get our flax fibre from is it can be woven in different thicknesses or weaves and whatnot. The main thing is we don't pregnate it, which means to inject essentially chemicals into it. So it is just the plant woven over and over and over and over and worked and worked and worked until, by humans and machines, until you get it to what you want it to be. Some companies are making cars, interiors out of this flax fibre. Other people, it's called European linen. They're wearing it as clothes, but we haven't. I've got a few samples here.
Yeah, would love to see that.
So we started out with something that was a bit thicker. I don't know, can you see that? We started out with something that was a bit thicker. So I've got 3 samples here. And then it just did, like this one we're still using now.
Yeah, right.
So we'll put this on the top and we'll put this on the bottom. This really nice, you'll feel, it's like a scarf. You could, there you go, Nicole.
I could get around that. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very silky. Whereas there was one year where we used a thicker, more like tighter weave, like you can't even like really see, it won't move, it won't budge, it's quite stiff, it just doesn't, whereas this one, it's like it's alive.
There's a lot of flex in it.
Yeah. So this is the stuff.
What caused the switch around, or the trying different ones?
Just experimenting, thinking, is it going to be better?
Right.
We didn't think we needed to make any improvements, but you just try something else to see if it would be better.
Was it like, so when you were designing like the best board, and this comes back to the fact that I obviously haven't gotten on mine in a really long time, what are the key markers for a good board that you're looking to improve through the prototyping phase? Like, is it the buoyancy of the board? Is it how smooth the ride is? Like, what are those markers for success that you probably needed to identify before you started prototyping?
Yeah. So the main thing is that it's not going to snap in half.
Yep.
That's probably the most common, worst problem you could encounter is snapping your board. So we've only had 7 boards out of nearly 3,000 boards reported back to us that have snapped, which is, when you look at business
how many
analytics.
Boards I see at the beach that are snapped, which is pretty regular.
Yeah, that's right. And with the whole, if these guys study business analytics and look at confidence intervals and levels and all that kind of thing, like that's in the 99.5%, like in that, so that's fantastic. But also what can happen is you can get impressions on your deck or onion rings so that's another indicator of how strong is this surface. So with this one, with the thicker one, because it didn't move much, we were finding we were getting more onion rings and it was harder to repair the board if they did get a ding. Whereas with the thinner, the more finer material, it's absorbing the, that impact, which then also when you're surfing the board, because normal surfboards are made out of fiberglass, which is silica, which is sand, and I like to use the analogy that if you're tapping on a glass, it's tinging, like you hear the ting and it's tapping and it's not absorbing anything, you're absorbing it, it's bouncing back at you. But whereas, if you, I don't know, what's something soft, like cotton wool, a natural fibre, it's going to absorb that, that, I don't know, what's the movement or the pressure. So when you're riding this surfboard on the water, it's quite smooth, there's nothing sort of bouncing back at you, you're not feeling any vibrations coming back up at you. And that also helps when you see all these, guys doing aerials and backflips and all sorts of things,
Which is clearly what I do when I get
Oh yeah. I'll see that this weekend. That's when, most of the impact happens when they come down, they hit the water, they hit it quite hard, and the board, doesn't take the pressure. It comes back up at you, and you put a ding in your board, or you might snap it. Whereas if the board's absorbing the pressure through the natural fibres, then you're winning.
It's interesting because you'd think heavier and thicker is stronger, but then it's like lighter and more flexible is better. Is an interesting concept.
Yeah, and even you'll have to make how people are still making surfboards is similar to how you make a boat. It's just like the more fiberglass and the thicker, more resin and everything we can put on it, the stronger it's going to be. But it's a lot of materials just to make something to play on. But with ours, like we're putting them in a vacuum bag, which is how they make, carbon fibre, like rocket parts. You probably do things in cars in vacuum
furniture
infusion.
as well, actually.
Resin infusion. I've seen chairs made out of this stuff, where they'll get a mould, they'll lay it with the flax fibre, they'll put the resin on and they'll put in under pressure and suck all the air out of it. And it makes for a really light, really durable product. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm going to tap back to you, Leon, for a second. Just think about like all of the different projects, products and stuff that you've worked on. The mission that our young people are tapping into is they're trying to make the world a better place for the business that they're creating. So, the purpose of it is that whilst they might be putting new products or new services into the world, that inherent within their design process is the consideration that the materials or the process or the way that they go about producing that product or selling that product is leaving a positive footprint in the world rather than a negative. Can you think of any examples of companies or people that you've worked with where that's been inherent in the design process, and maybe some examples of how they've brought that better business into the prototyping?
I would say the one I think of the most, because I worked in cell phone or consumer electronics design with Motorola as my first job out of school, and I was always trying to get environmental and sustainable and good design considerations included in the design process, and it was a struggle. Some things happened, some things didn't. There's a company called Fairphone. They're a Dutch company that have been around for maybe at least 5 to 6 years, maybe longer. They're on their third model at the moment. They've started their entire business model around ethics in terms of where they get their resources from, so where they mine their materials from to make the circuit boards, manufacturing, which is, everyone's probably heard about how bad consumer electronics manufacturing is in places like China, where people don't get paid much to assemble these things. And then the repairability of something. Phones nowadays, especially, you can't get into them, you can't get to the battery, you can't fix it. 10 years ago, you could change your battery around, you could sort of do some things that were simpler. So this company has actually put at the core of their business this modular phone. So it's a smartphone, it runs Android, it's as ethically as possible produced, it's where the materials come from, and as a user, you can take the phone apart and actually unscrew modules and take out the screen, put a new screen in about 20 seconds. These are things that were almost just like blue sky 10, 15 years ago, and this is like a real business model now. So they've kind of considered that instead of going, let's do a phone and we'll have to later on think about the environment and the materials, it's actually at the core, and it's a beautiful, really awesome thing. Makes me think of companies like Tesla as well, who they make a beautiful object, it's fast, it's desirable, it's high tech, and it just happens to be better than every other car in terms of its safety, its environmental considerations, its manufacturing. So those things are at the forefront, and it makes people interested in them, but they do have these core values that kind of move them forward.
Do you think that it's a strong value proposition for businesses today to intertwine their value proposition with their business values? Because I don't know that that was the way that business was done in the past.
Yes, short answer is yes, and I don't think it was, no. And I think now the expectation from consumers is much higher and much more educated. It's much easier for us to get information now about someone and who owns them and or what their practices might be like. And there's quite often articles that expose manufacturing practices or things that end up in landfills or things that are bad. You're mentioning microplastics. Now our expectation is that things don't create microplastics, or we don't throw things away. And it's the more the information we have, the more despondent we feel like, because it's like out of control and there's so much bad happening. But the fact that we know about it is good, and that we can look at a company and say, do I agree with your value? Am I going to buy your product? And the most powerful thing you can do as a consumer is when you're buying something, you're voting and saying, I'm okay with this. Here's a vote. Here's money. If we decided to not vote for things that were bad or not as considerate, and vote for things that are good, that are either local or good for the environment, it would shift very quickly. There's quite a lot of power in that. So I do think there is a much closer integration, yeah.
Thank you. Lou, I want to chat, before we duck into an activity, and then we've got some questions from students that we're going to get as well. I know you've talked about the really deliberate decisions you've made around the materials that you use for the board, but what other decisions have you made in building NoTox that keep the environment and your positive impact at the forefront of what you do?
Yeah. So there's two parts of it. It is the environment and also the people that work with us or for us. So the easiest thing that we've been able to do, and I think probably very rewarding, is for every board that we make, we plant a sea tree. So mangrove isn't really a sexy word, is it? So we plant a sea tree, and that's done through.
Somebody needs to create a marketing campaign to make the mangrove sexy.
Yeah. So and mangroves essentially are more efficient with oxygen and carbon dioxide and all that kind of stuff than rainforests are. So a lot of people go, oh, I'm going to plant a tree. Okay, that's good, do that. But we tried to think of something that was more related to what we're close to, the ocean. So that's where the sea trees came into it, yes. And then also with our workers, they're not having to cut fiberglass, so when you cut fiberglass, it sets off bits of really fine glass particles in the air, which they might breathe in, or irritates their skin, things like that. So that's why this is I wouldn't be walking around with fiberglass around the city. So no, definitely not. And our workers also, we pay them a lot more and also that's why our boards are very expensive, and we're proud to say our boards are expensive because I know the person that I'm paying to build those is being paid well. And it's not just how much I'm paying them, it's the environment that they're working in as well. And so we had a choice with swapping out some of our materials that we put in the vacuum bag, which was something that it was a material I could reuse over and over and over again, which is great, but the worker, it was harder for him to use, and then it was more fiddly for him to use and frustrating. So I was like, don't worry about it, I'll go back to spending the more money on something that we have to then pay to dispose of, so he's happy doing that job. So it's more like I want the guys to be happy at work. I don't want them to come and go, oh, I've got to do that damn process that I don't want to do. I want them to come in and be happy all the way through the process. Yeah.
And again, I think just another example of putting the values of the organisation above the profit. But I think also coming back to the conversation or the that notion that consumers today expect more of companies, I think they're willing to pay more when it is a values-aligned company.
Because then I charge more to the customer. So some people are like, oh, your boards are so expensive. I'm like, yes, they are. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to jump into a really quick activity, and then we're going to feed some of our questions back to our panelists to capture some of your thinking that you've collected before today. And what we want to tap into is a unique value proposition, which we've talked about a little bit now, and that's basically what makes your product interesting or different or unique or better than the competition and other people that might be out there. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. And the word that I want you to focus on is if UVP, I mean, I can't even say it, so if you can't use it, that's cool too. If UVP seems a bit complicated, the word that I want you to focus on is how do you make your idea compelling? So that when people hear about it, they want to know more. They want to hear more, they want to buy in, they're interested in you, and they're interested in the idea. And there's 4 really simple ways that you can shift an idea to make it more compelling. And that's materials, which we've spoken a lot about today. So what materials are you using in the creation of your products and service that creates a point of difference between your product and what everybody else is using to make their product? The second one is access, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. How do your customers get your product? Is it a subscription? Do they buy it only at a limited time? Is it a limited number? What is it about the way that your customer or client can get your product, maybe that makes you a little bit different to everybody else? The third one is features. So what does your product or service do that's better or different to other people? Do you provide a different level of service, or does your product have some fancy thingy that it does that's more interesting? And the last one is purpose, and we've spoken a lot about that today as well. So does your value as an individual and as an organization, is that part of what makes you different? Are you a social enterprise where for every board you sell, then one sexy mangrove is planted? What is it about what you do that makes people want to buy from you rather than spend their money elsewhere? But we're going to tap into materials, and I want to show you a couple of examples of some organizations that do different things with materials. And so these guys are an epic example of using a product that would normally be thrown out and then actually turning it into something very cool. And they're using like the stuff that you pull off billboard signs in order to turn them into bags. So a really cool idea to use a product that would normally go in the bin to convert into bags. These guys are called Skate Back, I'm pretty sure, and they actually use skateboards to create phone cases. So something really different in order to create a unique value proposition for the product. Like, it looks really cool, but they're also taking a waste product out of landfill and actually turning it and repurposing it into something new. These guys are called Green Toys, and they make children's toys out of recycling milk bottles. Another really great way to use a waste product to turn it into a new product that people want to buy. And so what I want to do now is throw to you guys for 3 minutes. How many unique or interesting materials can you think of to use in building your product or delivering your service? What are some alternative materials that you can bring into the way that you deliver your idea that might create a unique value proposition for your customers or your clients? We're going to give you 3 minutes, and we'll be back after that. All right, welcome back, guys. Hopefully you managed to come up with some cool or interesting materials that you might be able to bring into your design process. Now, if you don't have a device in front of you, don't forget that you can always jump on the Google later and see what cool or interesting materials might pop up. Sometimes you can Google, like if you're an avid skateboarder and you've got like 4 boards at home that you're doing nothing with, then maybe just Google, what can I turn my old skateboards into, and see what cool or interesting stuff people have done before, because that might help formulate a rad idea for you. Now, there's almost no such thing as a brand new idea. Sometimes it's like catalyzing the ideas and the thinking of other people and then turning them into slightly different ideas that work for you. So do take the time to Google and have a look at what's out there, because that might spark something interesting for you. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint. If you came up with nothing in that time, literally no ideas, you had no interesting materials, your brain was blank, you had nothing to contribute, then maybe the idea you're working on is not the idea for you. If you ever hit a huge roadblock in this process and you're genuinely trying to sort of ideate some new stuff and you've got nothing, you're bored by what you're working on, the idea sucks, you're not interested and you can't think of anything, then go back to your product or service list, or go back to your problem and actually pick something different that you find interesting. And that way you might find that you can generate a new train of thought and some more engaging materials or processes or ideas, because it might be more interesting to you. Now, we've got some questions that you guys have submitted before today. So we're going to ask these guys one question each to finish off. And Lou, I'm going to start with you. And this question comes from Jessie, Tanisha, Kate and Taylor from Park Ridge State High School in Brizzy on the south side. And these guys want to know, when it comes to having a product that perhaps ships nationally and internationally, how do you deal with the pollution or like the carbon footprint of like transporting products? Like, what does that look like for you guys?
So our materials that we transport in, so firstly I'll try and use a courier. If it's down the east coast, I'll try and use a courier who does not take the board in packaging. He only takes the board like that. He it just takes it how it is, so there's no packaging there.
So you don't have to pull off layers and layers of stuff at the other end? Yeah.
And if we do need to put it in a box to send it, interstate or overseas, it's a product called FlexiHex. So it's like a honeycomb cardboard that, you probably see, like sometimes glass bottles are shipped in it, and it's very expensive, like it's $10, $11 for a 1.2 metre piece, and so for that one I'd need 2 pieces, so that's $22 plus the box, which the box I then go to surf shops in my local area and I'm like, hey guys, you got any cardboard boxes you're throwing out? So I haven't had to buy a brand new box yet in 3 years, never bought a brand new box. Because then that's helping those local surf shops, they don't have to pay the waste levy to get rid of that rubbish. Yeah. And my customers don't seem to mind, no one's ever complained that I've sent our no-tox board in another brand's board box, so whatever.
Well, I guess the people that are buying your board probably appreciate the consideration that's gone into recycling that stuff and sending the board, because it's a values decision, right?
Yeah, that's right. And as far as sending it overseas, we try not to do that. Like we don't market overseas. If someone is so emotionally desperate to have one of our boards sent to them overseas, then we can't really do anything other than our sea trees, mangrove planting. But if we do send something, it's usually by boat, which is, if you look up the emissions from a boat compared to an aeroplane, all those types of things. Occasionally there is the problem of if something's urgent, like if we're doing a filming shoot in a remote island somewhere, which won't happen now, but has happened in the past, where we're like, oh my God, we need a board there now, then it does have to go on a plane to get there quickly. So I just guess we think, oh, well, I've got some credit in the environmental bank because I'm doing better than everyone else. I'm not perfect, but I feel like I'm doing better.
To make the best decisions you can when you can.
That's
cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Good question though.
Yeah, it is. Leon, I've got a question for you. So Talia, Chloe and Wyatt, oh no wait, not that question, sorry team. I apologise, I just gave you this like, it was almost you and now I've taken the question away from you. That was a great question as well, but I was looking at the wrong one. So Callum, Tim and Chloe from Cardine College in South Australia are curious to know, like, what is it specifically about what you do that you enjoy the most? Like, what do you get a buzz out of?
I would say it's so often it's the come up with the ideas. To me, in that process it's always the early stuff. It's the potential. So I draw a lot. It's like a compulsion. Like drawing is for me is like a meditation as well as a way to generate ideas. But that blank sheet of paper and a pen, to me, is the most exciting thing I could possibly imagine. And then being able to put down things that haven't been out there before, or that are new things, or to be able to let that my pen wander, and that I get like kind of butterflies when it comes up with potentials. And then if I take an idea and move forward down and realize that there may be a spot there that can go into, or that it's really a new thing or a different thing, it's also another little kick and little excitement. So I'm pretty easily entertained. I don't get bored because I've got, again, I'll always have pens on me. Like I've just got my pocket now. I'd rather walk out of a house without my phone, but make sure I have a pen, and I'll draw a napkin at a cafe or a piece of printer paper if I can find it. So it is really that early stuff that sparks me and makes me most excited, which as a consultant, it's actually good because quite often I can end up working on a project for the first few months or half a year or so and move on to something else, and that gets taken forward by different people. So that's really where my sweet spot is. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that you talk about having like the paper and the pen with you, because I know like lots of people, particularly now, like they have iPads or their phones and like an Apple Pencil, and that's what they use to like sketch and draw. But I'm a little bit the same. Like I have a notebook with me all the time with a pen, and if I'm really trying to like map out an idea, I need a whiteboard or I need paper. Like I need to be able to have that connection between my head and then the movement.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that's an underestimated part of creativity.
Well, last night I was writing down what I was going to talk about today, like writing it down. Yeah, writing is...
Yeah, the analog thing to me is critical. Like all those digital tools are great, like iPads or doing things in the computer in CAD or Illustrator or Photoshop, but you can undo and delete and get rid of the mistakes you've made very quickly. For me, when I'm drawing, I'll draw in pen, I don't draw in pencil. So if I'm drawing and sketching and I make a mistake, I either fix it or move on or do it again. And that way it's there on the page still. So sometimes I've got 100 ideas drawn out and I'll actually look at one that I've disregarded or crossed out. I'm like, actually that wasn't that bad. Well, that mistake when my pen went that way, not that way, was an interesting line. That's a different idea that otherwise would have been erased or disappeared digitally. So to be able to do things initially like that is really amazing, and then you transition them later on to digital to clean them up. But I figure as a pure initial creation tool, analog, even writing down, I'll write things down and I'll remember. I don't have to look at it again, but I've remembered it because I've written it, not typed it. Yeah.
No, I'm the same. I've got like a series of like moleskins at home, and I can remember because they're always a different coloured moleskin each time, and often I'll use a different inside. So I'll go from a blank book to a grid book to a lined book, and so then I'll be able to remember like what the page looked like when I wrote it down, and it makes it really easy to go back. I'm like, oh, it was on grids, and I'm sure and so then I can go back to the last grid book I use and flick through it, and I can find that. And often it's a random thought that I've written down. But 6 months later, I'm like, oh, I wrote like the beginning of a blog, or I wrote the beginning of a lesson, or part of a template, and the ability to go back. Whereas if I was searching for that file in my laptop, I would have no hope of finding it again. Yeah. Super powerful
Good
way.
idea. All my moleskins are black, so it's like, which
Yeah,
one was it in?
yeah, exactly.
Like 20 of them, like,
Yeah.
I know it was a black one.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
6 hours later.
Yeah.
You got to mix up the colours.
Yeah, colours
paper.
and the paper.
I
yeah.
just get the
That's
cheap.
it.
I get the cheap notebooks with a different picture on the front, and then I'm like,
too.
I ring some. If I leave it out, if I'm out, I'll ring my kids. I'm like,
Get the
it's
book with the
it's
thing.
the book with that picture.
Yeah.
You know.
That's awesome. All right, well, I just want to say a huge thank you to Lou and Leon for coming and chatting to us about their experiences with design and prototyping, and really at the core of it, through intent, creating a better business. So thanks to you guys. We're going to take a 20-minute break now, and then we'll be back to you with our next session, where we're going to have our grand finalists from 2018 and 2019 chatting to us about their experience in the exact same program that you're in. So have an awesome break. Go for a walk, get off your tech, grab something to eat, go to the bathroom, have a chat to your friends, maybe look at the idea that you've developed, and we'll see you back in 20 minutes.